Okay, before we start talking about what InDesign is and what it can do, let's talk about how it compares to the other Creative Cloud applications. It's really important to know what each of these is best at. So Photoshop is for image editing. That's what it's best at. It's not great for type. It's definitely not great for multi-page documents. Wonderful for editing images. It's a rasterized image editor, meaning that it's pixels. It's editing pixels and not vectors. Then when we come to Illustrator, Illustrator is fantastic for making icons and logos and marks and even more complicated illustrations, all based on vector, meaning that the pieces are already selectable. You don't have to try to select them like you do in Photoshop. You just grab them and modify them. Fantastic. Not great for multi-page documents. It's really just for a one-page document or an illustration that can go anywhere. It can go into a Photoshop file or an InDesign file, but that's kind of the source of illustrations that are vector-based. Then you come to InDesign, which is where we're at. InDesign is fantastic for multi-page documents. And what I mean by that is brochures, books, magazines. Anytime you have to control a lot of copy and layouts, you need as much automation as you can, and InDesign has that. You can fix little type widows and orphans. You can make type changes to a 700-page book with one stroke in InDesign. It's about that. But also, the beauty of InDesign is that you can also use it for one-page documents like posters. You can use it for print. It's set up as the #1 processing software for print design, but it's fully digital also. So you can make things that print, but you can also make social media posts and graphics. You can make art for signage and that thing. Generally, when you're doing something that's purely illustrative, you would do it in Illustrator and just import it into InDesign. But I'm going to show you both ways. Sometimes we'll be importing things from Photoshop and Illustrator, and sometimes we'll do some minor vector-based things in InDesign, because InDesign is also vector-based like Illustrator. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing you do when you open up InDesign is you see this, and there aren't a lot of options at this point. We just want to make a new file. It'll show us all the files we've had. Now, one thing before we go, you could click on Learn. If you go to Learn, you're going to see some tutorials that cover a good amount of the basic, just mechanical processes within InDesign. We're going to be covering all these, but I'm going to come to it with a design lesson. I want you to be good designers in InDesign. So we want to learn the technical, hard skills, and the soft skills. Go back to home, and we're just going to say create a new file. And then here's where we have a lot of options we need to talk about. There's some automated choices you can make up here. You can choose as not just your page size, but all these settings are affected. So let me show you. If you click on print, it gives you a letter, legal, tabloid, and a half-page letter size. There's even more presets. They have, I think that, yeah, there's a business card size, compact disc, which is so funny. If you go to web, you'll see that these are kind of standard formats for web presets. Also, at the bottom of all of these, you'll always see these templates. Templates are fine. I wouldn't mess with these except to use them as a learning tool. Like you could just make something from one of these. But as far as learning about design, not the best. And also, if you use these to make something, you have to know that worldwide, every InDesign user is also being given these templates. It's more for someone who doesn't take the time to take a class and learn to do it themselves, which you have done. So, and even mobile sizes. They have mobile sizes. So remember I told you it's digital and it's print. Okay, so we're just going to do a print file, 8.5 by 11. And now we're going to go to the right. I'm going to show you the choices. So you can name your file right here. So I could, all right, we're 8.5 by 11, which is fine. We chose that over here. We want one page. Now, facing pages is just, if you think about a brochure has the cover, and then it has two facing pages, and then the last page is a single page. If you're doing a standard brochure like that, and we will be doing them later, you want facing pages, but if you're not, you don't. Primary text frame is complicated, so we'll talk about that later. And then these two, columns and margins, those are really just guides, meaning they don't set anything that's ever going to print. We can also mess with these within the document. If you use a half-page margin, which is a pretty generous margin, you can modify that later. The bleed is if you're going to print this. The minimal bleed, whenever you print something, is 0.125, and we'll talk about the function of that later. The slug is something that I never use. You're basically, a slug is creating extra space around the ad in case there are instructions. Like if you have instructions to a printer that says all red lines do not print or something like that. So not really that useful. Okay, so here we go. Now we have a file. Let's talk about the interface and what we're looking at. At the top, much like Illustrator, you have an application bar and a control panel. And all of these tools are contextual. So if I make a type box, all the tools at the top are related to type. If I make an image box like this, everything up there is letting me resize it, fill it with a color. Now we're talking about an image box or a solid box. Okay, so that is contextual at the top. Down here on the left, of course, is the tool panels. The first 3 or 4 are about selection, page, all the way through here about drawing, pen, pencil, line. This one is your type tool. From here on down, you're going to see transformation and modification. And then this is viewing, the hand tool and the zoom tool. And here's your fill and your stroke. On the right, you have your panels. Every panel you need is available under window. So anytime you're looking for a panel, that's where you go to find it. Now I have the properties panel open. I always have the properties panel as my main panel because it's contextual just like the top, and you can do most things with it. So same thing happens if I make a type box. You'll see all the options for me with type, and also the options. Now if I select the box itself, I have options for centering it and things like that. So it can be difficult to work when there are panels all over your page. The best thing to do is to dock them all behind properties. You can see if I drag these all out, it's kind of hard to work. Let's put those back. So we can have these all where we can use them. Now let me show you the different workspaces, because it's pretty important before you start working that you know where everything is. And so you want to get a consistent workspace. So this one is Essentials Classic. I like Essentials Classic because it has this control panel at the top. Now watch when I change it to Essentials, it goes away. Now, technically, I could probably deal with it because I have all this stuff in the properties panel, but I really like seeing those things at the top, so I'll put it on Essentials Classic. Another one that's good is typography. Typography puts panels here that are useful for dealing with long document typography. So you got text wrap, hyperlinks, effects, paragraph styles, character styles, all that stuff's related to type. If you go to interactive, we'll be doing interactives at some point, and you can see once you get into interactive, it sets up, and some of these aren't docked, it sets up all the panels you'll need to do an interactive document. So that can be really helpful. The other thing you can do is you can make your own space. So if you wanted to customize this, let's see, character styles, paragraph styles. I also want swatches. And let's put the links here so I can look at my images. And if I say, well, this is really the perfect panels for me to work, I can go in here and say new workspace, and I'll call it MDV. I want the menu customized and the panel locations. Oh, see, there's already a workspace with that name. So now you can see up here, I can go to MDV or typography or one of these. Now when we look over here, let's put pages up here too, because I want to talk to you about pages. That's what's a little different between Illustrator and InDesign. InDesign has pages and Illustrator has artboards. So these pages, there's so much you can do with these. You can have master pages, you can create numbering sections, there's so much automation here on managing pages that you wouldn't see in Illustrator. When it comes to InDesign, the main thing you need to know about InDesign is there is a container and then there is something in the container, always. So let's talk about type. Now I've dragged out a type box. That's the container. This is the type. It's sitting within the container. But as I make the type bigger, and I'm using Shift Command and the greater than to quickly make type bigger, as I make the type bigger, the box doesn't change. So there is a function for this within Illustrator, the text box, but here this is the only way it is. This is how you size it. Now I'll tell you a secret. If you wanted to size this in the same way you do Illustrator by just dragging the corner, you hold Shift Command first before you touch anything, and then you go like that. And that's a way that you can do that. But that type is sitting within the box. And there's two ways to work with this. Number one, let's say that we want the type red. So you can see here the type is black, and you can see it on the properties panel, and you can even see it up here in the control panel. So if I make that type red, there we go. Now what if I want to change the actual box that the type is sitting in? Well, that's where you need to go over here. I want you to look right over here. Formatting affects the container. Formatting affects the type. So right now, this formatting is the type, so I can change it to yellow. Now if I go here, formatting affects the container, I can fill the container with black. And that's pretty much how everything works in InDesign. There's the container, and then there's the object within it. So this type can be styled within the container. Now if I make the container for this type smaller than the type, it'll just disappear. I've made the container too small, and you'll see that plus sign. That's telling me your container is too small for this type. But I could also make this container the size of the page, and then I can control how the type sits in the container. So I could go to Object, Text Frame Options, and I could make this aligned center. So it's right in the center. I could put body copy below it. I can do all kinds of things to this type box. I can also kind of treat it as an object in that I can grab a corner and bring it down. The container is separate than the type. So there's things that I can do if I wanted this text box to actually be kind of a visual treatment. I could change the text box a lot like you do in Illustrator. In fact, I can even go over here to the pen tool and I can add another anchor point, and I can grab that. Grab just that one. But that's not something that you would do in practicality. You would probably have a shape separate and then the type box above it. That way you can kind of move the type where you want it. So like if I copy this over right now and I just hold Option and drag, I'm going to delete the type out of that text box. And I'm going to delete the color out of this text box. So now I've got this shape. This has nothing in it except for the color black. And this has nothing in it except for the yellow type. And then when I go to W, I can kind of preview it. So let me show you those preview methods now. Under View, you can go to View and zoom in, fit the page on the window. These are going to show you your shortcuts. That's the important thing. For looking at your page, you really need to know the shortcuts. So when you want to see the whole page, you go Command 0. If you have a spread, you go Shift Command 0, actual size Command 1, zoom in, Command plus, zoom out, minus. Those shortcuts are good to know, and I'll post those. But the main one that I like to know is simply I have my regular view shows everything. It shows the edge of these containers even if they don't print, right? But my shortcut is just W. When you click W, it shows you basically what it's going to look like in print, and you can still keep working on it. So you can change it, and you have to do that periodically to be able to design. You've got to see what it's going to look like without all those. That's a container with type. Now a container with an image is the same thing. You take this rectangle frame tool over here, and the one with the X in it and the one without in it are the same. And that's a long story. I don't know why they don't change that. So to put an image into that container, I just go to File and Place. Now, when that places like that, let's click on the Links panel and we can kind of see what's going on here. I'm going to open up the bottom, come up here. So the container controls how much of the image you can see. It's almost like a clipping mask in Illustrator. You can change that container and view how much you can see of the image. Now, what if you wanted to get to the image? To get to the image, you just click. Now you can see the bounding box of the image itself. And by holding down, you can actually preview what you'd see. So if I just wanted the oranges and carrot, I could do it like that. Now, to make this actual container bigger, I just drag it. To make the image bigger, I click to get the image, and you can always tell because you've got the bounding box. Hold down the shift and make that bigger. To make them both bigger, I do it with a shortcut, which is Shift Command, and then drag it. And that'll make the container and the image bigger. So just like the text box, this container can be treated separately. So I could put a stroke on this. I could give it an angle, and it's all happening to the container. If I wanted to do something to the image itself, I just click to find it, and again, you can always see the bounding box. Now, if I want to tilt the angle of the image within the container, I do that. So they're separate. Or if I wanted to keep that container size, but I want the image to go a lot smaller, I want to get some of that pineapple in there, I would go like this and make it smaller. So here's the image, double click, there's the container. If I wanted to make that stroke red instead or white, I go like that. Now when I hit W, I can preview it and see what it's going to look like. So in preview, I could say, well, maybe I want to move this around a little bit. Or, come in close, okay? The container and the object. Okay, those are the basics. That's enough to get started with our first assignment. We'll be learning about the beauty and magic of InDesign throughout the semester.